Let me introduce our moderator, Sarah Wang from Andreessen Horowitz, General Partner. Thank you so much. Big round of applause to Sarah, who's going to tell you what's going on.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Very excited to kick off the panel. So the topic today, as you guys can see up there, is how to deliver on the hype for today's demand and tomorrow's promise. This is a topic very near and dear to me as I lead growth investing at the intersection of enterprise and AI for Andreessen Horowitz. And frankly, a lot of the hype has been on the consumer side to date. For good reason. As a firm over the last 15 years, we have frankly not seen so many companies get to 1 million users or even 100 million of revenue in some cases. But what's really, really thrilling to me is that, and I'm sure the rest of you guys in this room, is that this year, a lot of that focus has shifted to the enterprise and to developers building for companies and building companies. And I think a key change came actually in some work that we did when we surveyed about 70 enterprise leaders this year, and we're very surprised to hear that folks were tripling their budgets on AI spend this year. They were shifting away from just OpenAI into open source models, and I think really in a major way moving from just experimental workloads to production workloads. With this has come an entire new set of challenges and opportunities, and that's what we're going to discuss today on today's panel. And I think there's really no one better situated to discuss this than the two folks that we have speaking today. Pinecone and Langchain have really become synonymous with building GenAI. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce Edo Liberty, the CEO and co-founder, I'll bring you up in 1 second, co-founder of Pinecone, the leading vector database, and Harrison Chase, the co-founder and CEO of Langchain, the leading framework and DevOps platform powering application development for LLMs. So let's give them a round of applause. I'll bring them up. Unlike Jensen Huang, there will be no breast signing at this event. Great. Perfect. So with the first question, let's get started and address...
With it,
that's how you know it's going to be a good panel. So let's talk about some of the hype. And this is a question for both of you. What are some of the common misconceptions or overhyped expectations regarding GenAI that you guys have seen, and how can businesses navigate those?
Hype?
I think maybe the main one that naturally comes to mind is just that it's easy to build with GenAI. And in some senses it is. Like, it's really easy to get a prototype up and running, and that's what we see. But I think it's much harder to actually turn that into something that's production ready. And I think that's where we see a lot of enterprises, or just a lot of people in general, getting kind of like hung up. Like, I think of all the hype around Auto GPT and agents last year when it kind of came out in March of last year. And there's such an explosion of hype and interest around agents and GenAI then. And I think around from like the summer to December, it kind of cooled off a good amount in my mind in terms of like agents and building with agents, because I think people tried out Auto GPT. They tried out other projects that were super easy to get started with, and that they expected to just work magically out of the box. And they didn't, because there's still a lot of hard engineering that goes into building these things. And I think we're starting to see the tide turn, as you mentioned. Like, I would say, like, starting as of like this new year, I think we're starting to see more of these agentic and interesting applications come into production in enterprises, and it's really exciting, but it's still a lot of work. Like, it's the general solution that you can get in 5 lines of code from a snippet of Langchain or wherever, like, generally isn't enough for high kind of like quality production apps. There's still a good amount of engineering that goes into it. And so I think that's kind of like it's not quite magic yet. There's still work that needs to be put in.
Interesting.
I agree 100%.
Cool.
Yay.
I tell people all the time that with AI, impossible things are possible, but easy things are still hard. It's 100% descriptive of what we see.
Yeah. Well, maybe to double click on that, and to +2, I guess, on it being more challenging than people think at the upfront. What are some of the challenges that you guys see in building and delivering tangible results? And then obviously, how have you seen some of these folks overcome those challenges?
I'll maybe start with a general point that I think people like the first sort of like you know that a company is going to be successful with building something by the commitment that they have in setting on that journey. If they think it's going to be easy or whatever, we're going to just connect something here and here and here and that's going to be great, it's not going to work. If they understand that this is an undertaking, this is a new stack, this is a new set of technologies, or new sets of services, infrastructures, nouns and objects and behaviors that they need to get used to. They need to hire their talent, they need to wait time, they need to fail a few times. If they are signed up for that, they're going to be successful. And so it's a kind of meta point of like, it's not like specifically what they do to succeed, but rather their commitment to success is pretty much in what I see, pretty much the main indicator of whether they're going to be successful. And then eventually they figure out how to add knowledge and data and models and Langchain and chunking and persisting. They figure it out, but it takes time. It takes commitment.
Yeah, I think like the gap from prototype to production is one that we think about a lot, and yeah, there has to be kind of like commitment to bridge that gap. And I think what that gap means also depends a little bit on the types of applications that people are building. And so I think for some types of applications, they work kind of like out of the box, but then scaling them up is when you run into, I can easily do RAG over like 10 documents, but what if I need like millions of documents? And so there's that kind of like performance, speed, speed, cost really comes into factor. And then I think there's other types of applications where the gap is that they don't work out of the box. The AutoGPT doesn't work out of the box. And so I think there, the what helps bridge the gap is things that make it work. And I think, that's where we spend a lot of time on trying to add controllability, observability, testing, things like that. And basically bring these very general and broad kind of like contraptions a little bit more kind of like in a controllable fashion. And so I think it kind of depends on the type of application that you're building in terms of like what's needed. But I draw like, first you got to make it work, then you got to kind of like make it fast and cheap so that you can actually hopefully service all the users that you have.
Yeah, totally. In that survey I mentioned, they all happen to start with C, but it was a coincidence. Control, customization, cost was sort of came up over and over again in terms of challenges, but also what people are looking for. So yeah, that resonates. You kind of referenced this is a new stack, and so it's a good segue maybe to talking more about Pinecone and Langchain specifically. Full caveat, we are an investor in Pinecone, but even outside of that, I think starting from last year really, there was a new stack that emerged. A lot of folks use the acronym OPL. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot of model diversification, frankly, but certainly Pinecone and Langchain are major players in that stack. And so I wanted to get into more how you guys are specifically helping companies with some of these challenges. And I'll start with you, Edo. So in many ways, getting GenAI right is about having the right data. And Pinecone's technology really relies heavily on data quality and relevance. So how do you guys ensure that your customers have access to the right data and they maintain these high standards of accuracy in AI models?
Well, sadly, we don't do enough. It's true. We really focus on what we call knowledgeable AI, right? At the end of the day, your whatever language model you're using, it doesn't know anything about your company, your contracts, your customers, your code base, whatever it is that you're trying to be intelligent about, right? And so you can speak with somebody with 180 IQ, but if they don't work with you and they don't like know what's happening in your world, they're not going to be helpful to you at the workplace, right? So it doesn't matter, people tell me, oh, the models are getting better. It doesn't matter how good they are. It's a question of what they know, right? And so now the question is, if you're trying to build a knowledgeable agent, chat, assistant, whatever, you're going to need to figure out what data, what it needs to know to be useful. And you're going to have to ingest it somehow, maybe using Langchain. You're going to have to figure out how to chunk it and break it up, how to embed it, and so on. There are many options on how to do that. Langchain is doing a phenomenal job at being opinionated and having, kind of bringing people in through that journey. What Pinecone really specializes in is being able to scale that, run that efficiently, cheaply, at scale, in production, and so on. So when that thing starts working, you can just run with it. You can just start operating it, and at the same time scale it up, because oftentimes, and what we've seen is that the amount of data actually makes a huge difference. So you can, in some sense, ingesting 10 documents is not really helping. It's sort of like a large context. And then 1,000 documents, you start seeing stuff that you wouldn't otherwise see, but it's not, you might not still see the aha moment. When people start ingesting tens of thousands, millions, sometimes literally billions of documents, suddenly something changes qualitatively. Maybe we'll get to talk about it later. We published a blog post about what happens when you ingest the internet into an index in Pinecone, and some pretty wild shit happens. It ends up being significantly more accurate than even on question answering on web data. It ends up outperforming top models, and so. That whole pipeline of what data needs to go in, how you bring it in, and how you ingest it into Pinecone, incredibly important. Again, unfortunately, today we don't do nearly enough to educate our customers on how to do that. You can tell them because you're doing it.
I mean, no, I was actually going to ask you, I think we talk about education a bunch because I do think that's super important, but I actually don't think we do enough of that either. And so, I mean, I think the main thing we believe is that it's just super early on and super fast moving in this space, and stuff is changing pretty rapidly. I actually think it's slowed down a little bit over the past few months, but I think as a whole, it's still extremely early on in this space, and education is so important. And so I actually don't think we do as good a job as we should. And so I'd echo that sentiment, and we want to do a better job of that as well. And I think, that it super important in this space, in this market.
I will say maybe just as a funny aside to maybe explain how much people crave guidance. Okay, we have plenty of notebooks and examples on our website, which are pretty much examples on how to use Pinecone. Okay, it's kind of like tutorials for the API and the SDKs and so on. And we wanted to make them a little bit more fun, so it's like a micro application. You load data and whatever, it's like semantic search or recommendation or something. The number of customers who run that in production is scary. This is not an application. This is not open source. This is a how-to guide. So this is kind of funny aside.
Yeah. No, it's interesting on that. Just on that trend. One is we have seen in this wave. I mean, the build versus buy decision's always been a quintessential, decision for a lot of folks in companies. But the decision to build and the skew toward that, maybe just because we're so early on, is fascinating to see. I think a lot of people are choosing to build, probably folks in this room, and as a result, the education piece is really important. And there's folks out there like, I don't know, the Andre Karpathys of the world, where his videos are getting more views than unboxing videos or whatever people look at on the internet. But and I think that's reflection of exactly what you guys are both saying, this desire and this hunger for, to learn and to adopt this new technology in sort of a first-hand way versus just buying. Yep. Very interesting.
And actually, one comment on that, because
Yeah.
I was talking, I forget who I was talking with this about, but like on the build versus buy, like what is, what is reasonable to expect kind of people to build versus kind of like buy. And I think there's in my mind, the interesting, like you want to own things that are kind of like core to your kind of like application logic. And so I think what we see people wanting to do there is, I think a lot of like I'm going to use like flow engineering as kind of like a term to describe kind of like the flow of your application. Like that is like really important to the actual business logic of your application. And that's like a kind of like competitive advantage. But what's actually not super important is the infrastructure around that. And so I think as we think about kind of like, testing and monitoring, and as Pinecone thinks about kind of like, retrieval and those sorts of things, like I think a lot of GenAI is great because you can use the logic, the reasoning engines of these LLMs to kind of like imitate and augment and supplant kind of like these human processes. But that's the core bit that people should be kind of like building and focusing on. And and I think like that line between like that versus the infrastructure is actually kind of like I think that's why you see like a lot of people using tools like Langchain and Pinecone, but I don't think that's why there's not like a kind of like a really good chatbot on every website out there, because it's kind of like every website has a different kind of like, cognitive architecture that is needed to explain their services and their website, but the infrastructure will be the same. And so I just wanted to bring that. I think it was literally today I was having this conversation, and it really reminded me of these points.
No, there's many good examples of this. I mean, there's an example I give often, which is even if you do just question answering on like documents, okay, it's very different if those documents are Wikipedia articles or if it's news, right? It's news, it's the news from an hour ago, absolutely makes the news from 3 hours ago obsolete, right? But if it's religious texts, well, the text from 1,000 years ago supersedes the text from 2 weeks ago, right? And so just time ordering, and like that is, the AI wouldn't know if you care, like how much you care about like time ordering, right? The fact that news is whatever. The fact that you publish two contradicting facts, which one of them takes precedence, right? That's an application level thing. And so all of that logic, and that's just one example. Every application that each and every one of you builds has a bunch of those, right? Yeah. And so like we ourselves, like we use it's funny, there are a lot of services that we use Pinecone. Like, so we ourselves use our documentation question answering is actually, is using Pinecone, but we don't build that application. We actually tried, and we built something, and it wasn't great. And they came to us and said, hey, we built a bunch of stuff around it and all the logic and everything. So that application layer, that logic, that sort of how do you delight your customers with all the components is absolutely critical.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, maybe just to extend that a little bit, and I'll tie it to, Harrison, your point on just sort of the infrastructure piece maybe being a different layer that folks may not choose to build that piece of it. Langchain obviously plays a pivotal role in the AI stack on the infrastructure side. How have you, I'll start with Langchain, but I'll kind of turn into maybe a broader question on just sort of successes. But how is Langchain helping your customers improve on large language models, right? Because I think this is also a theme of like, hey, what comes out of the box, even though it's very magical, doesn't get you all the way there. So would love for you to share more on, maybe the improvements you've seen, but also that journey of, I mean, obviously Langchain is not, has several products now. So hearing about that would be helpful. And then after that, I'd love actually some inspiring examples of successful implementations from both of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, maybe even just framing it in a little bit in kind of like the journey of Langchain. So Langchain started off as an open source package, and I think the initial pieces in there were kind of like individual components, building blocks. Mainly models and vector databases were the two big things there. And then really like high-level entry points into building kind of like applications. But what I think we actually lacked at the beginning was a really flexible kind of like runtime for constructing your own logic and your own applications. And as we've just discussed, like that's the part that people really want to own and should be owning and should be thinking about. And so the evolution of Langchain, I think over the past year and a half has been really moving towards kind of like controllable kind of like orchestration logic. And we've kept these same kind of like components, that's a key part, but we've moved kind of like more away from the high level entry points, which make it super easy to get started, but more towards kind of like the low level, highly controllable kind of like frameworks for creating either chains or agents if you're using LangGraph, which is an extension of that. And then the other thing in this aspect of kind of like going from prototype to production and controllability has been kind of like Langsmith, which is a platform that we've built for like logging, testing, debugging of LLM applications. And just tying this into some of the favorite applications which we see being built. I think a great example of this is, so Elastic has kind of like an assistant that goes along with their logs and helps you debug and helps you troubleshoot. And that's built on top of LangGraph and Langsmith. And so I think I love using that one because one, it's an example of basically an agent. It's a highly controllable, highly specialized agent. I think it came out in like February or March, so right around this timeline of like when things started really clicking. And I think it perfectly utilizes kind of like the highly controllable aspect of some of the newer things we're working on, as well as the debugging and testing things which help people iterate at speed. And so yeah, that was maybe a bit long-winded, but that's kind of like how I view the trajectory of Langchain and the stuff we've done over time. And all of it's really just been an aim of making it as easy as possible to build these types of applications which connect language models to data.
I love the Elastic example, actually. Any interesting examples of successful implementations that you'd add?
Sure. I mean, this is, I'll give one of our larger customers is Notion, who builds their AI Q&A on companies' data. And like with Inkeep on the docs, we are also Notion users. And so this is another situation. We use our own product and we see how people use it, which is great. The amazing thing is, seeing their journey, right, and seeing sort of what they're grappling with, and it sort of fits exactly what Harrison was saying. In the beginning, it's a period of let's just figure out how to make this thing say the right things, okay, and that might take 2-3 months of experimentation and so on. But then you're like, wait a second, we're going to deploy it to how many users and how much volume and how much this is going to cost and what security guarantees do we have and who's going to wake up at night when this thing is sort of like starts coughing and how are we going to do this really, right? And then you start having like real production grade issues and like, okay, now it's not a theoretical question of we'll have to figure out cost at some point. Now the difference between like 7 cents and 3 cents is a big difference, right? So that took several months, and we still of course engage with them, but now I'm actually consuming the product, and it's so delightful. Like all the stuff that I would bug my team with on Slack, I'm like, wait a second, I don't have to go to Slack. I can just ask the Q&A in Notion. It's like, hey, say, what happened with this and this customer? Did we tell them that X, Y, Z? And the answer is, yes or no, and here it is. And you're like, great, I now A, I got my answer immediately, and B, I didn't have to bug somebody on my team, right? And because of that, it created like this virtuous cycle that now my sales team is actually loading Salesforce data into Notion just so they can ask questions about their accounts, right? And so, like, now because you've added value to the data, now people bring more data into your platform. So that kind of, and funny enough, like that actually comes back, comes back into Pinecone. So it's like a big, weird flywheel.
Yeah. Wow. That's really neat. I mean, it does. There's sort of I think what was it 2009, 2010. Mark famously said, "Software is eating the world," but AI is eating software. And I think if you're not an AI company, and what does that even mean, right? I think I would consider that example of Notion, why they're an AI company with that AI product. And I think it's, you're kind of dead in the water if you don't offer enhancements like that to your existing product. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interface that people just expect at this point. It's the same way that my kids just go around the house like talking to stuff, or try to swipe my Mac screen. It's like, what the hell is wrong with this computer, right? It's just an interface. They grew up in a world where you speak to stuff and they answer, and they understand. And every screen is a touch screen. I mean, if it's not, it's just weird, right? And it's the same thing with software. If your software doesn't understand you when you talk to it and it replies back in language, it's just it's gonna look antiquated. So you're not gonna you're gonna miss something.
Yeah. Could not agree more. My 3-year-old actually has a Curio. I don't know if anyone has played around with that. It's like an LLM stuffed into a stuffed animal, or combined with a stuffed animal. And he won't let me turn it off. Like when I try to turn it off, he's like, "No, I want to talk to Grok." But yeah, I mean, this is his future at 3. Terrible parenting, but so actually, it's probably a good segue. Maybe just to poll the audience, how many of you guys are builders, founders, builders at company startups? Can I get a show of hands? Oh, wow, great. Awesome. Almost everyone, it looks like. Cool. Well, I wanted to throw in some questions for you guys. All of these are for you guys, but just on the topic of building, just because in addition to helping your customers build Gen AI, you both are building fantastic companies with a whole set of trade-offs that come with the success that you've had. And so, maybe I'll start with you, Harrison, on Langchain. So, Langchain is well known for being one of the fastest growing open source projects in history. How are you balancing that engagement and excitement with the demands of enterprise customers who maybe have different needs than your community?
Yeah, I think so. I think to some extent there are a lot of needs that are common, and because I think it is so early on, people are trying to figure out how to build these things, and a lot of what we want to do is enable that as much as possible. I think the main point where that's maybe diverged is, I would say, early on last year when the space was really fast moving, and so I think a lot of the community wanted the newest features right now, kind of like no matter what, and I think enterprises wanted they want stability and kind of like assurance that what they're building kind of like won't change. And so I think that period of time, like spring of last year, maybe was probably the toughest for us to navigate, because there was this pressure to move very, very quickly. But at the same time, we were hearing from enterprise customers that they wanted more support and more stability. And so those two things were a lot at odds. I think luckily that's gotten easier. I think, as I said, I think things have slowed down a little bit. We released like our first stable version of Langchain this past January. But yeah, I think that in the moment of like just trying to stay up to speed with the fastest moving things, but also provide stability to enterprises, that was the biggest kind of like mismatch in kind of like what people were asking for.
And Edo, I think on that theme, I know you have to think about this on a daily basis, but how do you balance that trade-off between the here and now that could translate into near-term revenue and building the longer for the longer-term vision that guides the company to success, sort of in leaving a bigger legacy beyond the here and now?
So I spent most of my life as a scientist before starting Pinecone. So for me, anything shorter than like 30 years out is like pretty short term. So I'm like, okay, it's only for 5 years from now. That's fine. That's pretty practical. But jokes aside, it is a struggle, right? It's a first of all, just to double click on what Harrison said. I mean, we talk about this internally all the time about the main attribute of a database is that it's stable and it's the same and it's dependable and it's up and it's running and you know how it behaves. And living in a medium that quite literally every 2 weeks, like some seemingly earth-shattering news is like, oh, like everything is changed, like, oh, okay, I guess so. But so that that has been nauseating, I think.
Exhausting.
But by the way, exhausting for everybody here too. Like you're trying to figure out what to build, and every 2 weeks, like something else, like another stick in your spokes. I'm like, oh my god, like I have to start at some point. Like if I just kept every 2 weeks, I'm gonna have to rethink everything. When do I start?
Totally.
Right. And so I will say that just as a guidance, maybe I'm departing from your question a little bit. You kind of have to tune down the noise. I mean, a lot of it is fodder, a lot of it is hype, a lot of it is just marketing material. Like if you try to do something and it's hard, then it's hard. Like it's, if you're building a company and that's like a shimmy layer on top of some LLM, and you get something in 2 weeks, okay, everybody can do it in 2 weeks. You're not that great. Maybe somebody else will take a month and you got it in 2 weeks, okay? But if you're trying to do something and it's really difficult, that's when you know it's worth doing. Hopefully it's also valuable, right? So that goes back to sort of answering your question, right? There are a lot of kind of sharp edges and questions, requests, and so on that our customers have of us that oftentimes they're just easy solutions, right? And I talked about the people who are being successful are the ones who have commitment. You don't hear this from the people who are committed because they figure out the problems and then they bump up against a brick wall, okay? And then they're like, okay, fine, this is something we really can't do. Like we're going to figure out how to chunk a document, but we're not going to go build a vector database for the love of God, right? And what I focus on is breaking those brick walls. I'm like, I'm going to hire the right people. I'm going to build a culture, and I'm going to build a company that has the ability to break brick walls, and that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to try to make it nice to use as a product and so on, but we're going to focus on really hard problems and make them easy enough that they just become a non-issue, right? So that's sort of how I think about it. Yeah, I will say that the user experience is also incredibly important, and so a lot of that is not hard in the same way, but also extremely hard. And I had a conversation here with somebody, I forget whom, about the difference between easy and simple, right? Making something simple is not easy. It's incredibly difficult, right? So we really focus heavily on simplicity, which makes our lives a lot harder sometimes, but also a lot more delightful for our customers.
Great. Well, while we have both of you here, it was kind of fun right before this. We were even just talking about partnership and the value of that. Within GenAI in particular, partnering with the right startups and established companies has been crucial to advancing GenAI. Obviously, on the foundation model side, you see that with the hyperscalers, with you guys potentially as well in terms of distribution, et cetera. Can you guys share more how you think about setting up successful partnerships, how you pick who those partners should be, and then Also, what are some of the watchouts? And I don't know if there's anyone from a hyperscaler here, but how do you make sure they don't eat your lunch by building the same tools and trying to commoditize folks? Maybe start on the positive side on what's worked well for partnerships.
I mean, so I think partnerships in a space like this are super important because there are so many different components that do go into building kind of like a production-ready kind of like application. For us in particular, the two main partnerships that we need to have are with model providers and with vector databases. Yes, and Pinecone. and like most application, you need those two things to build an application in addition to whatever Langchain is kind of like providing. And so then, how do you kind of choose which ones to work with? To some degree, it's kind of like led by the community. Like we see a lot of people using OpenAI. We invest a lot in kind of like the OpenAI integration. To some degree, it's also there's also kind of like a difference between easy to get started and what's able to carry through to production. And so it's really easy to get started with like a NumPy in-memory vector store, but like I don't even know if we have one of those in Langchain because we wouldn't recommend that for anyone, right? That's not like a good path for people in the long run. And so it's a combination of kind of like those two things. The main thing that we've tried to do recently, and Langchain has, I think, like 700 different integrations. And the main thing that we've tried to do recently is really make it clear which one of those we both like think are good, but also like believe in kind of like the teams behind them. And so we have kind of like dedicated partner packages for a bunch of integrations. Pinecone obviously is one, and so I think there's like 20 or 30 mostly model providers and kind of like vector databases, and so that's kind of like how we've tried to unify kind of like our engineering teams with engineering teams at other companies, because we think there's a really like you need to have this together story to kind of like succeed to build GenAI applications, and it's really, really hard to do it without that.
I can't agree more. I can summarize. Let your customers speak and listen to them, right? If they're using your tool with somebody else's, constantly listen to that and go make that better. And make that, once you decide to invest in a partnership, make it really good. Like really ask for bad feedback all the time. I just did that an hour ago.
I'll check my Slack to see if you responded.
I can verify that. Great. Well, I'm going to ask one more question. Then we have a great audience here, so we want to open up to audience Q&A. And I always hate when people are like, predict the future, but I'm going to ask you guys to predict the future. And I'll actually, talk about or pull on the thread. I think, Harrison, you alluded to progress. I mean, and it's all relative, right? Because progress has been lightning fast over the last 18 months. But over the last few months, just the observation that it seems to have slowed a little bit. Curious what you guys are most excited with regards to what's around the corner with GenAI. What are you guys looking out at? And feel free to take this in any way you'd like. Could be also what are some of the gaps that you're really excited for folks to maybe even in the audience to go and fill and build.
I think the two main things that we're spending a lot of time thinking about are evals and agents. So I'd say evals is more of a gap currently for people building. We're building a bunch of tooling around there, and I think the thing that I always like to think about all of this is like what's actually new with all these LLM things. And so I think there are a few like interesting things that are new about evals for LLMs, even compared to traditional ML models, and definitely compared to software engineering. And so we're building some tools for that, and then agents. So yeah, I think progress on the core kind of like model front has definitely slowed a little bit from where it was a year ago. I don't think there's any kind of like debate about that. But I think we're seeing a lot of effort being put in kind of like the systems around the models and building up these agentic-like applications. And yeah, I think that's a fantastic path forward. We're starting to see more and more applications like this and more success, and we're extremely excited about this and doubling down kind of like on our investments there.
Edo?
For us, like, I mean, I'm unashamedly very excited about our mission, which is to make AI knowledgeable. And people think about us as a vector database because that's the main component that we had to build that was missing to get there, right? And you really have to be able to do that at large scale and so on to make that a reality, but that's not enough. Being knowledgeable is not just to be really knowledgeable. Well, like, somebody is like, when we meet somebody who is very intelligent, we actually conflate two things oftentimes as humans, right? We conflate one, they're just IQ, how snappy and, whatever, like insightful and, kind of thoughtful they are. And at the same time, just how knowledgeable they are. What do they know? What information they bring to bear? What information, like how much do they remember that, they can, bring up in a conversation? And when you think about the set of skills that requires, it's actually incredibly deep. It's not only a database. You have to encode information, you have to store it correctly, you have to process it correctly, you have to retrieve from it correctly, you have to figure out what's relevant, what's not relevant, and so on. This entire part of the stack is something that the entire community understands not nearly well enough, right? And this is something that, just for the hardware between your ears, that's more than 50% of what you do. And we know so little about it. It's sort of like scary, and at the same time, super exciting, because it's a whole new frontier of knowledge that we barely start chipping away at.
Yeah, totally. I do think, maybe to echo both of you guys, what I find really exciting is just I think what the companies are asking for, and I would echo, by the way, Harrison, we were at that dinner a month ago where I think we talked about evals half the time. And I think what's exciting at a meta level is that the industry has evolved enough now where, to the point on from prototype to production, the demands are changing, right? If you take the analogy to software development, no one needed Datadog in the beginning, right? Only later on when you actually wanted observability for what you were building, because what you were building was touching more users, did that kind of need become really important. And so it's exciting to see that evolution in AI development, and I think we're just at the beginning. So awesome. Well, I'm gonna look, hopefully you guys had some time to think about your questions. And I think there's a mic. Oh, perfect. Does anyone have here, up front.
Thank you for sharing your insights today. I had a question about agents because, Harrison, you mentioned that. How much of that do you think is hype versus what you can deliver? Because a lot of the use cases that I've seen personally when we are building like various GenAI applications is once something doesn't work initially for a GenAI application, there's a tendency to throw it at an agent with the mentality of like, we throw a problem at a agent and let it figure itself out. So just curious to know your insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some stuff about agents that are absolutely hype, but I do think there's agentic-like applications going into production. I say agentic-like because I think it's hard to even agree on a definition of an agent. But I think if you think of the spectrum from maybe like some sort of like chain, very deterministic, auto GPT, very run in a loop, wild. I think there's something in the middle that is starting to get shipped, and it's kind of like controllable agents. And so what I define that as is basically you're still letting the LLM choose kind of like what actions to take, what steps to take, but there's a controlled kind of like flow that you're imposing on it, and you're kind of like constricting it, and that's like a form of flow engineering that I kind of mentioned earlier. I think another way to think about this is like there are a lot of issues with agents. One is their ability to plan. That's why kind of like throwing stuff at AutoGPT doesn't work, among other reasons. And so if you can remove some of the ask of that planning from the LLM and enforce it in the flow that you as the engineer, presumably knowing the subject and what it should do very well, can kind of like impose on it, you're basically saying like, no, LLM, don't worry about planning. Like, I'm going to help you out with that. Like, here's how you should think about it. And those take a lot more work to build, right? Because you really have to understand what the flow is. You have to encode different parts of it, whether it be in prompts, whether it be in how you're doing retrieval, whether it be in what the flow is. But those are the types of applications that we see getting into production.
Great. How about in the back right there?
So as we actually see retrieval augmented generation use cases, evolve, do you see a world where we won't have to use retrieval augmented generation at all? Like, will that completely change? We see, engines like Perplexity and others give you immediate capabilities to add documents to the search and things like that. So, do you have a point of view on this?
Yes.
Spicy.
No, I mean, it goes back to what I said before about building an application, right? I mean, if you're building something, it has internal logic. There is no such thing as, quote unquote, the right, document to retrieve or the right fact to bring up. And it might not even be, quote unquote, right. If you're building if you're building an agent that specializes in astrology, right? It's what does right mean? I don't even know what that means exactly, right? Pardon people who believe in astrology here. And so, no, I don't think there's going to be some one mega solution that solves everything. I think people are going to build applications, are going to figure out how to solve the problems that are in front of them, and they're going to use really powerful tools like models, like vector databases, like eval frameworks, like orchestration layers. They're going to figure out how to build with a new stack to solve problems faster, better, and new kinds of problems in the same way they learn how to use the mobile stack and the internet and the cloud. They just, I have a new set of tools and I can build new things. I need to learn how to use the new tools and I can build now millions of new applications. The same thing is going to happen. I'm willing to bet that. And at the same time, I'm sure a handful of solutions are going to become very popular and are going to sort of dominate pockets of usability. It's like, yes, for a bunch of stuff, Perplexity is going to be great. They're going to run a very successful company off of that. Fantastic. That's not going to prevent the rest of the industry to adopt to AI.
Great. How about right here in the front?
Thank you for your presentation. That's wonderful. And thank you for the tools that make LLM apps development great. I'm looking to the future, and I'm sort of asking, sort of dovetailing on that last question, in terms of what do we see in terms of the next year? I mean, in the last year, for us developers, we've seen so much changes, great changes, but do we see, in terms of these tools emerging and evolving further, particularly around things like LLMOS and DSPy? Where do you see the direction going in terms of, like you said, are we going to have a framework that developers can look towards to making their applications?
I think some of the things on the horizon that I'm excited about, one, I think like the base models will get better at kind of like planning. So to the point around LMOS, I think those like agents, that will just strictly make all agents out there better. It still won't make them like easy, but it will make them better. I think multimodal is definitely coming. That for sure is on the horizon. I think that'll be really, really interesting to see the applications. I would actually say that multimodal to date has been a little bit underexplored by the community and by users. And so as the models get better and as different types of multimodal inputs start to get rolled out, I think that'll very interested to see that. Those are the two big things I expect from kind of like the model providers. I do expect like a series of kind of like best practices to emerge for sure. Like, we've been building these applications, like for not that long, and another year will basically double the time that we've been building them, right? So I think best practices will kind of like start to emerge, and I think there's an overwhelming amount of choices right now for building. I think best practices among those will start to emerge. But yeah, multimodal and kind of like planning and reasoning from the base model providers are what I'm paying particular attention to.
How about in the back over there?
Yeah, so one question for Edo. Do you differentiate between, like, Harrison mentioned about multimodal, like, so if you're dealing with documents versus images versus videos, is there like some intuition you have around, like, maybe a different indexing strategy is much better suited for videos versus, let's say, documents for RAG related stuff?
Sure. I mean, this is, again, the term RAG is, this was a planted question, by the way. Madhav used to work with me at AWS. I'm ratting you out. But the question wasn't planted, though. But yes, I mean, the RAG is it's an umbrella term. It's basically, you retrieve information on top of which you do generation. And there are like 5,000 variation of each one of those, right? Probably way more. It's like, it's an combinatorial explosion of options there, right? And so yes, 100%. It's not even multimodal itself is a misnomer, because, like, let's say you do images. I mean, what are you trying to do? Deduplication or recommendation for shopping or labeling, or like each one of those is different, right? And so, and text, I mean, people say, oh, like, what is text? I'm like, there's no such thing as text. A legal document is not the same as an email, is not the same as a tweet, it's not the same as a Jira ticket. They're all text, but what they mean, what you do with them, what you build with them, what you expect to get out of, like, it's a whole different thing, right? And so, for me, multimodal has to deal with like input type more than it is like carries any meaning into the application of what's possible with it. Of course, there are things that are only possible with images, like whatever, because the data is images, but that doesn't say much about the actual application behind it, in my opinion.
Thank you for giving the mic. Quick question. I'm fascinated about this idea of completely AI-run companies, right? We were talking about hype, it's way along, but at some point we're going to have like companies that are completely operated and managed by AI systems, and we're going to have hybrid AI companies in before that. I see a couple of operating models for AI systems to work together. So hierarchical, sequential, maybe asynchronous, more random and autonomous selection of agents. What is your perspective on how agents will operate together and how they will be supervised or managed from the top?
Yeah, I think agent human kind of like interaction patterns is probably one of the most like unexplored and interesting kind of like topics out there today. And I say agent human collaboration patterns because I think like before we get to like fully autonomous swarms of agents, I think there's a few steps in between. But I think, yeah, this idea of how do agents interact with us is really interesting. So chat has kind of like emerged as the dominant UX so far, specifically streaming chat, because these agents sometimes take a while to think, and so you want to see kind of like their intermediate steps, and you want to have the token stream back so you know they're actually thinking. Two other like UX patterns that I'm very, very interested in, and I think get more towards this idea of fully autonomous things, because chat's still very human in the loop, right? I have to send a message. I have to kick it off. So one of them is kind of like the idea of more kind of like ambient agents, so agents that kind of work in the background, and this could be like cron jobs, this could be listening to events. But I think the interesting UX considerations here are, as a human, how do I know what that agent is doing, right? Because I'm no longer kicking it off. I'm no longer in the loop, and that gives me a ton of leverage, right? Because I can now have like 10 of these running in the background, 100 of these running in the background. But it's also a little bit scary because how do I know what they're doing? How do I control them? How do I give feedback? How do they reach out to me when they need help? Because they're not going to know everything. And so I think interaction patterns around that are really interesting. I think Devin, the autonomous kind of like software engineer, has some really interesting kind of like UX components there that I think are pretty inspiring for other sorts of applications as well. And then I think a variant of that as well is kind of like more collaborative agents. So think kind of like me and an agent working in a Google Doc together. And I think that's similar to kind of like the ambient computing type of idea. But now you have this like merge conflict resolution where if the agent goes off and does some work and I do some work, how do I merge the things? But overall, very similar to this idea of ambient computing as well. And so like I think human-agent interaction is extremely, extremely interesting. And so if people are thinking of interesting ideas there, I would love to chat. And then I think the next natural, and I think the way it will basically work is I think there will be other UXs like Devin that come out, and then you'll kick off 10 Devins at the same time. And then maybe you can start to think about layering on like a supervisor who kicks off those, and then you supervise the supervise. But I think we've got a few steps to get there. But overall, UX extremely interesting, and I think very underexplored also.
I just want to encourage you to look at the literature of boosting that. The math behind combining weak agents to strong, consistent results is fairly well understood.
I'm going to do a quick time check. 2 more questions? Okay, great. All right. Way back there with the black and white shirt. Yes.
Thanks for sharing great insight. I'm one of the contributor to Langchain community, and I built an application with both Langchain and Python. And 2 major problems that I encountered when building an AI agent application is, one is the hallucination, and the other one is the latency issue that is caused by multi-turns of generation and API call for both LLM and retriever to the vector database. So I'm wondering what efforts are you guys are doing, and is there any things to handle those things in your milestone?
So I mean, latency of course is a huge consideration for us. We are already, for most applications that we are a part of, we are not the bottleneck. So even on billions of vectors, we're talking about 100 to 100 millisecond round trips. On small data sets, it could be single digits. And we're talking about those LLMs, especially the hosted ones, could take sometimes 10 seconds. And so we are almost never the bottleneck on latency, at least. On hallucination, it's sort of a team sport. You really have to. The whole thing needs to kind of work well together. And you're 100% right. Getting your application to not hallucinate is complicated. And I think this is where our teaching the market, you are an ability to ingest large amounts of data so you can actually draw on a large amount of information to not hallucinate. The way you build with Langchain and iterate and find ways to hallucinate less. The way you test that you even hallucinate less, it's hard. Testing, it's whole. People completely underestimate how complicated it is. Like we talk about this thing as if like that's just easy. If one of my favorite interview examples is to build a unit test for a six-sided die. Like if you just, that's not easy to test for. If this thing actually gives you a random number, that's hard, right? Let alone an LLM not hallucinating, right? And so, the whole industry is trying to figure out how to reduce hallucinations. I don't know exactly what you're trying to build. I'm, happy to learn, but yeah, and this is it's a whole literature around it.
Yeah, I liked what you said about like a team sport as well, because like I think like a lot of the applications are really about getting all the components to kind of like work well together. And by that I mean like, oftentimes I think hallucinations are caused by the LLM when it's making decisions. Sometimes it's the LLM messing up, but sometimes it's just not having the right information about what to do. And so you can fix that with better prompts. You can fix that with better retrieval. You can fix that with flows and removing some of the planning. And then around latency, like, yeah, I'm guessing most of the latency came from, like, you're doing many LLM calls, right? And so I think there's maybe a few things here. One, like, I think this is a place where, like, exploring alternative UXs that do support these long latency things are actually, that's interesting. Like, you know, if you need to do things that take a while to get it to work, what are the UXs that support that, and where can that be valuable? I think that's really worth thinking about. And then the other thing would be fine-tuning as well. So that's something we're starting to think about a little bit more. But if you can get, like, these ideal agent trajectories, can you fine-tune a model to get even better performance, or at the very least kind of like faster performance?
Oh, right there in the middle. Oh, yeah, right there, yeah.
The hardest one to get the mic to.
I was going to ask on Harrison, I think it was like the second to last question, but there was this point of you guys are doing a lot of investing in evaluation, and specifically that's kind of the world of evaluation frameworks for LLMs is more challenging potentially than we know from traditional ML. Yeah, curious to hear why, and I guess like why you guys are investing a lot in evaluation. Why is it different from the evaluation frameworks we're familiar with in kind of more traditional ML tools?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we're investing a lot there because we hear it's a big pain point, and I think it's one that we're in a pretty good position to solve, given kind of like both the place that Langchain plays, but then also the background of a lot of people in the company is in kind of like evaluation and testing of ML systems. I think comparing it maybe to both like software testing, but then also ML testing. So I think compared to like software testing, both ML and LLM testing have a few things that are different. The like table stakes one is like, you know, in software testing generally, you hopefully expect all of your unit tests to kind of like pass. With ML and LLM testing, it's, you know, there's some percentage of the time, there's some score that it's getting, and you basically want to be tracking that over time and making sure it doesn't fall below threshold, or making sure that it's improving. And so this kind of like time component is, I think, a little bit distinctive and unique. For LLMs in particular, I think there's a few things. There's two things that we've been working on, or I'll highlight three things, I guess. So one, the metrics for LLMs are not nearly as well defined or good or trusted as metrics for typical ML systems. And so I think practically what that means is that looking at your data is actually still super valuable. And so we've put a lot of effort into the UIs in Langsmith to make it very pleasurable to look at the data that's going through your system and really understand what's going on, and really intuitive to grok where kind of like mistakes might be happening. Second, I think with LLM systems, there's this interesting thing where oftentimes it's much easier to evaluate two answers against each other than evaluate to a ground truth. So I'd argue that the most trusted kind of like metric for LLMs is LLM Sys where you're literally kind of like evaluating which of two answers is better. And so I think these types of like pairwise comparisons, so that's one thing that we've rolled out recently, where you can explicitly kind of like score two things against each other and determine which one wins. And so I think that's a really unique compared to even like ML systems. Like I didn't see any of that when kind of like doing testing. And then the third thing that we're actively working on right now, and I'm really, really excited about, is one of the main ways that we see to evaluate these LLM systems is actually with LLMs themselves. And so that brings in a whole nother problem, which is how do you kind of like, how do you prompt engineer that LLM? How do you trust that LLM? How do you align that LLM with your kind of like human preferences as an evaluator? And I think and so basically what you're doing is you're building an LLM application to evaluate other LLM applications. And I think we have a lot of kind of like, we have a lot of insights into how to do that. And so we're working on some tools there to make that kind of like automatic alignment a lot easier and more smooth.
I'll just add with our April Fool's joke, just to kind of maybe underscore how ill-defined evals are. Okay, we launched an LLM we called Luna after the office dog, who never hallucinates. Literally hallucination 0% on whatever you ask, and it did that by always answering some version of I don't know. right? So it never said anything wrong. It was also utterly useless, right? And you're like, okay, so I don't care about hallucinations anymore? Okay, so what do I do care about, right? And so I think we, again, is just, this underscores like evals are hard because we don't even know what we're asking, right? And so I think we have to sort of like set aside magical thinking on, something's going to be perfect. It's like, okay, what do I really care about? How do I measure it? How do I actually make sure that it progresses and improves? And, even things like hallucinations, clearly it's not a good enough measure because Luna would have been the best LLM in the world.
Awesome. That was a great place to wrap. Great questions. That was fantastic. Can we have one more round of applause for our two panelists?
And thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much.